Welcome back to part 2 of this tutorial series, and click the link in the info box. I'm serious, you will not understand what's going on if you haven't looked at that tutorial and tried to understand how it works. I started by putting the ends of a really long piece of thread through a needle so that there would be a sling thing at the end. Then I took 5 beads and put them on the thread, as you can see here, in this little sling. Then I put the needle through the sling and I pull it tight to make sure things don't move around, and now it looks like a little flower with petal things. So, and now I'm adding 1 bead in between every 2 beads of this. So I add a bead and I go through the next bead in the row and I pull tight again. This is important. Then I add another bead, and I really hope you can see enough here to get what I mean. And I go through the next bead in the row, and I do this 5 times in total. And it's very important to always be aware what bead you're coming out of and which one you're supposed to go into, because these things shift around when you're not doing this with wire. I think you could probably do this with wire, but it would be quite a hassle, to be honest, because wire is quite thick. And as you can see, because this is all thread, it already starts shifting around. And if you're doing it correctly, it's going to look like a little star. And see here, I'm adding the last bead. And now it looks like a tiny little star. And now I'm going back through the first bead I added this round, the one sticking out. And I'm going to start all over again. By the way, these 1 bead thingies, I'm going to call those anchor beads because they anchor the rest. So now I'm adding 2 beads, so you can see here. And I'm going back through the next anchor bead. And then I add another 2 beads, so this is going to be a 2 bead row. Again, going back through the next anchor bead. And you can tell I'm starting to have trouble getting the needle through the individual beads, because you have to go several times through most of the beads with the thread and the needle, and it gets kind of cramped, and at a certain point it's going to be tough to get through some of those beads. So, and again, I'm doing just the same thing I did with the last row, just this time I'm adding 2 beads. I'm going to do a whole lot of this in this video. And now it starts getting kind of tricky because I have to get through the next anchor beads, but the 2 beads that I added first are kind of in the way. So I'm coming out here and I have to go back through the 2 beads I just added. I hope you're starting to see a pattern here. And I'm going to start all over again, adding another row of anchor beads. So right now this whole thing looks a bit like a cherry blossom. And we're adding the next first anchor bead for this row. And yet another one. And it's really advisable to take the tiniest needle you can find, because getting the needle and all the threads through the beads several times in a row, it's really difficult, let me promise you that. Just in case you were wondering, I'm using Rokai beads size 2 millimeters, which is, I think, pretty much the standard, and we're going to have a little cut here. See, this is where I dropped everything and had to collect my things again, which is why there was a little cut here. So here I'm adding the last bead, and you see me going through 3 beads at a time, so I just took a little shortcut because I had to go through the first anchor bead again at this point. And now we're deviating from the pattern which I shared with you in the beginning, because now I'm taking 3 beads and I'm doing a 3 bead row all the way around. The reason I did it was because the Blackberry would turn out way too small if I just stuck to the normal pattern while using the beads that are only 2 millimeters wide. And it starts looking kind of funny now, but it's going to make sense in a little bit, because when I start pulling the thread and I go all the way around, it's going to start to look roundish. See, it's starting here already. I'm starting to pull and it starts looking like a little bowl. It's advisable to pull on the thread every once in a while, see if you think you can leave the berry flat, and then when you've added all the beads you can just give it one big pull, because the thread is spiraling and spiraling through all the beads for several times. It's probably not going to work out if you try to pull it into shape afterwards, so you really need to give it short little tugs in between. Not too hard, because then your thread might rip, and if that happens you have to start all over again. And now that we're done with the 3 bead rows, we're going to do another set of anchor beads. And now you see with the 3 beads it gets really tricky, because you have to go into those 3 bead rows again and again. If there's one bead that's just slightly crooked, you might not be able to get your needle through, so make sure that the needle really fits through the beads and a couple of threads in there to make sure that you can pull it through, because otherwise it's going to be such a hassle. You cannot fiddle the thread through without the needle. It doesn't work. I tried. And there's going to be a cut in a few seconds, because those 3 bead rows, I'm going to do 3 of those. Oh my god, that rhymes. I have to leave this in. Yeah, so if you want the Blackberry to be a bit longer, you're going to have to repeat those more bead rows a couple of times. And the cut comes here. And here we are. I added 3 more rows of the really long rows, and now I'm finishing the last of the anchor beads that go in between. And this is the point where I chose to start slowly closing up the Blackberry, because if they get way too long then they're going to look kind of funny. So the next thing I did after I finished this row was starting with the 2 row beads again, so that it would slowly close up and look like a proper fruit. And here you can see I just came out of the last anchor bead, and I'm picking up 2 beads and I'm starting the next 2 bead row. It's already getting more and more repetitive. I was afraid of that, but don't worry, I'm pretty sure this one will be the longest video of the bunch. I already sped it up to, I think, double the speed, and I cut everything I could. So if I hadn't done that, this would be about an hour long. I didn't do that, and now I'm really glad of it. And you can already begin to see, as I'm pulling the thread in a little, how the Blackberry is starting to look more roundish again. So it's pulling everything in at the top, because I reduced the number of beads this time around. You've got to be a little careful around this point, because it gets more and more difficult to see which ones are the anchor beads and which ones the regular beads, because they're all kind of leaning into one another. So try to keep track which bead is which. I made a lot of mistakes at this stage, and I had to open it all up again, and that was very annoying. Learn from my mistakes, as usual. And here you see me starting another row of anchor beads, and you can see how the hole is getting more and more closed, and it's getting ever more difficult to tell what the heck I'm doing, because the beads are moving around so much, and it's just everything moving closer and closer to all the other beads, and it's just kind of cramped. So I cannot stress this enough. Try to keep track of where you are with your beads. And we're coming to the part where I'll have to stop doing the rows, because the Blackberry needs to be stuffed. You will see in a minute that I used leftover fabric bits from when I cut down the flat Blackberries. You can also use stuffing if it's dark enough. If it's white, it's probably going to shine through. And the tutorial that I showed you used, I think, colored glue or something. I mean, if you want your Blackberries to be really stiff, that would probably work as well. But I chose to make them squishy, so here you can see me trying to squeeze little bits of fabric into the Blackberry. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't believe I used leftover bits from the flat blackberries. I think it was some black cotton batiste that I still had lying around. At least I had some little bits and pieces, so I recycled those, and they made it all nice and fluffy. They weren't so stiff as the other cotton I used. So if you want them to be squishy, use something soft, and it's a lot more fun that way, believe me. It's just so much fun when people touch them and go, oh my god, they're so realistic. And there will be another cut here, although I forgot why. I think something with the camera. And here you can see me adding one bead between every anchor bead that we did last row, and we're now slowly starting to close the Blackberry. It's still kind of difficult to tell which bead you have to go into with the needle at this point, and adding to that is the fact that the stuffing material is trying to come out, so this is a bit fiddly. By the way, I think if at any point during this you should feel that there's not enough stuffing in your Blackberry, this is probably the part where you should put in some more, because very soon you won't be able to anymore. I wouldn't stuff it too much though, because then things might start poking out at the sides where there are the 3 bead rows, because there's quite a lot of space in between, so things might be sticking out here already. And now we're nearing the closing of the second to last row of this Blackberry, and we're approaching another cut. I don't remember what I did wrong. I think I dropped a bead or my needle or something, I don't know. Here it is. And finally we're nearing the end. This is the last bead row, so we're adding a row of anchor beads between the last row of anchor beads. Are you bored yet? Because this stuff gets really repetitive. I just wanted to include it so that this series would be as complete as it could possibly be. I think the closer we're getting to the end, the less you can actually see. I tried moving the camera further in, but then as you can see, the image has to be quite wide, because I move the berry around so much, and if I zoomed in more then I would be out of frame all the time, so that really wouldn't have worked. Believe me, I tried. And I think we're done with the rows here, and I'm just going back through the last row for a couple more times just to be sure, but don't do that too much, because then there will be too many threads in the beads and you won't be able to get anything else through, because this is not quite the last bead yet. This is it. And then my tripod fainted. It's okay though, he got better. So I took the bead, and you can't see it here, it's the only thing I really messed up in this video, but I put the needle on the thread and I went in on the opposite side of where the thread came out, and then I just went into more beads and then back through the 1 beads and then through more beads. I basically did a figure 8. If you get to this part of the Blackberry, you'll know what I mean. It's kind of hard to describe. The reason I did this, which is admittedly a little bit complicated and a bit overkill, is so that the 1 bead that finishes the Blackberry wouldn't stick out. You can see it's slightly sticking out here, and I didn't want that, so I didn't just anchor it to 2 other beads. I just went round and round, and I anchored it to all of the last 5 anchor beads that I made, so that it wouldn't stick out so much. Kind of worked a little bit. And now you can see me making a knot. Just 1 though, and I'm not pulling all that hard, because at this point if I rip the thread that would be very sad. And I went in exactly where I made the knot and pulled it out the other end, and then I cut it off because I didn't need it anymore. You could in theory use the rest of the thread to attach it to some leaves, some thread, some ribbon, I don't know, but I decided not to. And now you can see what it looks like in the end. It's all squishy. I made myself several of these, and I really like how realistic they came out. And because you've been so patient to watch the entire video, here's a picture of a cat. See you in the next one.